Hi everyone, my name is Ellie Everts, and today I am going to be showing you how I made my skirt for my strawberry wedding dress Ichigo cosplay. Woo! This skirt is really cute. It's lots of fun to flounce around in, and I hope you'll enjoy getting to see how I made it. There are a few different techniques in here that are a little more advanced than my normal skirts, so I hope that it'll be of use to you in the future. All right guys, let's go ahead and get sewing. So first things first, we're going to begin by cutting out our skirt. I decided to make this as a circle skirt. They are not only my favorite shape of skirt, but they fit really well over petticoats. And if you guys saw my video a couple weeks ago, I made an absolutely giant petticoat to go under this costume. So go check it out. Anyway, we are making a circle skirt. So I have cut my skirt out of two materials. My fashion material, which is a polyester pink crepe de chenille, which is a very lightweight and flowing material. And then my second material, which is a cotton broadcloth. Normally, I'm not gonna be lining my skirts. I don't think there's much of a need to line a normal skirt. However, this skirt is going to be piled with tons and tons of strawberries. And even though I made these strawberries with a very lightweight material, no matter what, they're still gonna be heavy and weigh down the skirt. So if I just used my crepe de chenille, the skirt would be falling all over the place and it wouldn't look very good. So I decided to flatline it with a heavier duty material that will be able to hold up to the weight of my strawberries. I started by cutting my skirts and letting them hang overnight. This way they have stretched out on the bias and they are as stretched out as they're ever gonna be. Next, I laid down my lining layer and made it as flat as possible on my floor, and then I laid my fashion layer on top of it, trying to get out any loops or bubbles or anything like that. Next, I am taking some thread and I am going to be basting these together with just a pretty long stitch. It's nothing that is going to stay for forever. That's why I'm using black thread. It's just going to be there to hold these pieces together so they act as one while I'm attaching the bias tape and the berries and the waistband, etc., etc. So this is something you see a lot more in historical or couture sewing. I've never done it before, but I'm actually really glad I did because it made these materials act as though they were one. I didn't have any issues adding my bias tape or attaching my waistband at the waist. So here you can see my entire skirt has been basted together. It's nothing fancy, it's not perfect, but it's enough to really help when constructing this skirt. Next, I am going to go through with my machine and I'm going to baste both the hem and the waist of this skirt together. This is just extra basting to make sure everything stays in place. Now that our skirts are basted together, we can go ahead and start adding all the extra details, starting with our bias tape. Now this is a bias tape foot. I purchased this off of Amazon. I got a set of like 7 of them for maybe 10 bucks. It's a really great investment if you make a lot of cosplay costumes, since I think cosplay has the most bias tape ever. For some reason, designers just think everything needs to be lined with bias tape. So I'm starting by cutting out some strips of my magenta satin on the bias. So what is the bias? Well, when it comes to fabric, you have a few different sides. You have the selvage, which is the edge that everything is finished off on. And then you have the grain, which is the other edge. And then in between those, the hypotenuse of them, look at that, math terms, that is the bias. Now, even if you have a non-stretch material, if you cut something on the bias, it's gonna have a little bit of stretch just based on how material is made. So bias tape is cut at that angle, so that way it'll stretch and lay nicely around curves. So I have folded my material and now I am cutting 2-inch strips on the bias. I've said a lot recently that I really love my rotary cutter. I didn't think I would ever need one, but once I bought one for my Water Blue New World costume, I use it for literally everything. It's a total lifesaver. So if you don't already have a rotary cutter, I suggest getting one. You can get the cutter and the mat and the guide for like 20 bucks on Amazon. It's definitely well worth it. Once all my bias strips were cut, I went ahead and stitched them together. So when it comes to bias strips, you don't simply stitch them together flat. If you did, it just wouldn't look as nice and it wouldn't stretch as well on the bias anymore. So you are going to be sewing these together at an angle. So you're gonna lay your strips like this and then sew along the hypotenuse again. Oh my gosh, look at us, we're so smart. Sew along the hypotenuse, which would be like right here. Okay, so if you put your fabric strips like this, you're gonna sew across like this. And then when you unfold that, it's gonna still be nice and stretchy on the bias. All right, so now that we've sewn all our strips together, go ahead and press open those seams. It's very important to press open these seams, especially when you're using a bias tape maker. It's just gonna make it look so much nicer. So please, please, please press your seams. And once we've pressed our seams, we are going to start using the actual bias tape maker. So the way bias tape makers work is they start out wide on one end and then end up thinner on the other. And somehow they take the fabric and wrap it around a plastic piece that's inside that bias tape maker that gives it these beautiful folds. So you are going to thread your fabric through the bias tape maker, and then with your iron at the edge, you're going to press it as it comes out of the bias tape maker. This will keep those folds nice and crisp. So now that my bias tape is pressed, ready, and waiting in the wings, it's time to level out the hem of my skirt. I let my two skirts hang before we basted them together previously, but since they are made of different materials and they have a different grain, they're going to have a different warp as well. So as they were hanging, they suddenly were not the same size anymore. So now I'm going to trim this up and make it as even as possible. I'm also trimming it with the petticoat underneath. This way I can make sure it is hitting perfectly along the hem of the petticoat. So now that our skirt has been leveled, it's time to attach our bias tape. I am simply stitching this onto the skirt using the first pressing line as my guide. Now this is where I got into kind of con crunch mode, so I wasn't able to film as much. But I went ahead and finished off the bias on my skirt by hand blind stitching it. So here's a quick look at the hem of my skirt. I did a hand blind stitch just because I really like the way it looks. It's a super clean finish. Now after that, let's take a look at the single layer petticoat that I built into my skirt. So a few weeks ago, I did a video on how I made my petticoat to go under this skirt. Now I've made one more layer of that petticoat out of white organza that I'm going to build into the skirt. Now the only difference here is that the hem of this layer does not have the ruffle anymore. It is now this beautiful organza lace that I made using my silhouette cameo. Now, I don't have any video of the cameo cutting my lace. It's actually kind of involved for the silhouette to cut my lace out, since the cutting space is only like 16 inches long and it's sticky, but it's not like super sticky. So I had to keep going on and making sure that the fabric wasn't moving. It was pretty challenging, and I think I would do it a different way in the future. So if I ever make lace like this again, I'll record it then and tell you how I did it, because this was kind of an experiment. Anyway, so I cut this out using my silhouette cameo. You could also use a Cricut, anything that is a die cutter that will cut for you. Or you could cut it by hand if you wanted to. And now I'm going to be heat sealing the edges of my organza using a heat knife. Now, there are some heat knives that are very precise and you can actually cut fabric with them. That was my original plan, but this heat knife that I got off of Amazon for maybe $10 or $15 is not precise enough or hot enough at the very tip to cut my fabric. So I am simply using it here to melt the edges of my fabric, so that way it's not going to be fraying all over the place. You could also use fray check, but I don't really like the smell of fray check, and I don't think it works as well as heat sealing does. So once I heat sealed all of the edges of my lace, I went ahead and stitched it onto the bottom of my petticoat layer, just like I did for all the layers on my actual petticoat. And now I have gathered the top of it and I am putting it into the waist of my skirt. Once I have gathered the organza to the waist of my skirt, I am going to go ahead and stitch it on with a basting stitch. Now at this point, I have already installed a zipper. I used an invisible zipper along the back seam. There is only one seam on this skirt, so it was the place to put the zipper. So I've basted my organza layer onto the inside of my skirt, and now it's time to add a waistband. I am just using the same white cotton that I used for my lining, and I am making a 2-inch wide waistband. So just like any other waistband, I cut my material at 5 inches, folded it in half, and then folded over the hem of it as well. I then went ahead and stitched in the ditch to attach this waistband. Last but not least, I also added a set of hook and bars on the waistband of this skirt. When I wear this skirt with my cattail, I actually leave it unzipped about an inch or so, and that's where the tail goes. And then I use these hooks and bars to hook the waistband of the skirt over the tail. This helps hide the hardness of my tail and keeps everything nicely in place. After that, all that's left is attaching my strawberries. And these strawberries were simply attached by hand with a quick whip stitch. I think this skirt is the cutest thing I've ever made, quite simply. It is so fluffy and adorable. I love the material that I chose, and I think it flows really, really well, even with that thicker lining. Plus, the custom lace at the bottom is really, really cool and just a fun extra detail that I didn't have to do, but I think it added a lot to this costume. And I mean, who doesn't love these fluffy strawberries? Like, come on, they're so freaking cute. All right, so that is how I made my skirt for my strawberry wedding dress Ichigo cosplay. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, I think this is the cutest thing I have ever made, and that's kind of my MO. Like, my MO is making cute things. So for this to be the cutest thing I've ever made is kind of intense. But I really, really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope some of the techniques I used here will be able to help you in the future. If you have any questions about how I made this skirt, feel free to leave them down in the comments. Boop, 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 boop. And if you enjoyed watching this video, also be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Next week, we will be working on the bodice for my strawberry wedding dress Ichigo. This bodice is really, really, really cute and has a few extra details on it that I can't wait to show you. So be sure to subscribe and hit the bell button so you'll get a notification when that video comes out. As always, everyone, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more photos of this costume or more progress on how I made it before the videos come out, feel free to hop over to my Instagram. I've posted some photos there, and I have a whole highlight on how I made this costume. So go check it out there if you want to see in a little bit more detail. Of course, thank you to my Patreons. You guys are awesome, and you are really the reason why I was able to make this costume. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I really, really, really appreciate it. If you want to become a Patreon supporter, please head down into the description. I have a link down there. We have lots of fun on Patreon. You get some early access, and you get to see all the photos from my photo shoots and fun things like that. So please go hop on over there. I would love to see you there. Okay, everyone, thank you so, so, so much. And until next time, be sure to keep sewing, stay positive, and have fun. I will see you later. Okay, bye.